Hey, ladies and gentlemen. This is Miss Hummer here, and today we're going to be doing Unit 6, Notes 5. So we're going to be taking the stuff you worked on the previous note sheet, and we're going to be going a little bit more in depth on it so that we can kind of figure out more about what we can do with trigonometry. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of a review of what we learned yesterday. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. Okay, so that's the things we need to remember. We usually look at that as SOHCAHTOA. That's how we remember that. So let's go ahead and let's kind of review some of that. So for number one, we want to find sine of A. Well, sine of A, remember sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So if we're looking at A here, we want to do the opposite, which is going to be 12 over the hypotenuse. Remember, the hypotenuse always sits across from the right angle. So we have opposite over hypotenuse. Well, 12 divided by 20 is going to give us 0.6. Next, let's take a look at the cosine of A. So for the cosine, we want to do adjacent over hypotenuse. Now remember, your hypotenuse is always your largest value. So we have 16 divided by 20, which gives us 0.8. Next, we want to do for tangent of A, we want to do our opposite from our angle, which is 12, over our adjacent. So we'll do 12 divided by 16, which is going to give us 0.75. So that's a lot of what we practiced on the previous worksheet. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's do a couple more examples. So we want to find the measure of BC. So I'm going to call that x. So what do we know? Well, AC is the hypotenuse. So that means that x has to be my opposite and that 13 has to be my adjacent. So I have to think, okay, what trigonometric function represents adjacent and opposite? And that's going to be tangent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tangent of my angle. So tangent of 64, and I'm going to set that equal to my opposite, which is x, whoa, sorry about that, guys, over my adjacent, which is 13. Okay, so let's go ahead and simplify that out more. So remember, that's being divided by 13. So to get rid of that divided, I'm going to go ahead and multiply by 13 on both sides. So then I get 13 tangent of 64 is equal to x. Now remember, at this point, everything gets punched into your calculator. So I always want you to be practicing while we watch the note video, because if you're calculating it all wrong, you can ask then so we can take a look at what's going wrong. So when you do that, you end up getting 26.65. And if you notice that the 13 has an m on it, which means meters, which means x also has to be labeled as meters. So that's your answer for number 2. Let's take a look at number 3. Number 3 wants us to find x. So let's figure out what we know. Well, we don't need to know anything with the hypotenuse. We know opposite. So 19 is going to be opposite of our 47 angle, and x is going to be adjacent. So I have adjacent and I have opposite. Okay, so what that tells me is that I need to do tangent. So I'm going to do tangent, which is going to be opposite over adjacent. So tangent of my angle measure is going to be opposite, which is 19, over adjacent. So now I'm dividing by x. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply both sides by x. And then I end up getting x tangent of 47 is equal to 19 when my x's cancel out. Well, now I want to solve for x. So I'm going to divide both sides by tangent of 47. And I end up getting that x is equal to 19 divided by tangent of 47. So now I'm ready to just plug that into my calculator. A lot of times you need to put parentheses around that 47. So go ahead and plug it into your calculator so you can make sure you get the right answer. When you plug it in, you end up getting 17.71. And again, you'll notice that 19 has an m on it, so we need to make sure that we label our x with meters as well. Okay? Next, let's take a look at number 4. So for number 4, we're trying to find x. Well, sitting across, I notice x is the hypotenuse. We know that this angle measure is 61, so that makes 22 the opposite. And we know that x is the hypotenuse. So we want to do opposite over hypotenuse. Well, that's going to be our sine function if we think about SOHCAHTOA. So we're going to take and we're going to do sine of 61 is equal to our opposite, which is 22, divided by our hypotenuse. So again, we're dividing by x. So I'm going to start by multiplying both sides by x. So then these x's cancel, and I end up getting x sine of 61 is equal to 22. So now I need to divide both sides by sine of 61. so that I can get the x all by itself. So I end up getting x is equal to 22 divided by sine of 61. Now I need to type that into my calculator to figure out what my answer is going to be. When you type it into your calculator, again, I want you to pause the video and try this on your own. You should get 25.15 feet. If you're not calculating it wrong or doing it along with me, you could be getting it wrong on the practice sheet and you won't even know till it's too late on the quiz. So that's why I want you kind of practicing that now. Okay? So next, let's take a look at this next part. To find a missing angle, you must use inverse sine, inverse cosine, or inverse tangent. So if you're using a scientific calculator like the ones I suggest, the inverse sine and inverse cosine are all above the sine function itself. So you should be able to see them above the sine function, so you can just hit the second key to get access to those. Okay? So let's go ahead and let's calculate this out now. So what we're going to do is we want to find the measure of angle A. So we want to find this measure. Well, what sides do we know pertaining to the measure of angle A? Well, we know the hypotenuse because that's sitting across, and we also know the opposite. So I know that that's going to be sine. So now instead of just saying that sine of A is equal to our opposite over our hypotenuse, we're actually going to solve and figure out what A is. So that's where this idea of sine inverse comes in. So if you take the sine inverse of this side, that cancels out your sines and you're just left with A. So what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So we have to take the sine inverse of this side. So my A is equal to the sine inverse of 18 divided by 27. So as you're going through this, if you can't locate the sine inverse button, let me know. I'll try and help you find it. So again, this is just a lot of punching numbers into your calculators. Well, when you do that, again, try it. Make sure you're doing it right. You should have gotten 41.81, and we're going to label that degrees. Okay, we want to label degrees because A represents an angle within that triangle. So it's 41 degrees. Now let's take a look at this guy over here. So it wants to know the measure of angle T. Well, what do we know in reference to T? Well, this is adjacent to T. We don't know anything about the hypotenuse, but we do know the opposite. So we know the opposite and adjacent. What function uses opposite and adjacent? Tangent does. So we know that tangent of T is equal to our opposite over our adjacent. Well, how do we undo a tangent? We do the tangent inverse. So to this side, I'm going to do the tangent inverse. That's going to cross those out, and I'm just left with T. And on this side, I'm going to do the tangent inverse. So T is equal to the tangent inverse of 8 divided by 12. So what is T equal? So go ahead, plug that in your calculator. See if you're getting the right answer. You should have gotten 33.69. And again, you want to label that degrees because we're talking about the angle measure of the triangle. Last but not least, it asks us to find the missing parts of the triangle. So we want to know all of the angle measures and we want to know all of the sides. Well, first of all, I noticed that I already know 2 of the 3 sides. Now, typically when we did right triangles and we knew 2 of the 3 sides, we did Pythagorean theorem. So I know my hypotenuse and I know the leg. So I'm going to do 5 squared, and I don't know this one, so I'm going to call it x. Plus x squared is equal to 13 squared. So I'm just using the Pythagorean theorem to get those sides. And so then we're going to do 25 plus x squared is equal to 169. And then we're going to go ahead and solve that. So I'm going to subtract 25 from both sides. And I end up getting that x squared is 144. Take the square root of both sides, and I get that x is equal to 12. So we didn't know the length of FH. Well, the length of FH is just going to be 12. So there's one of the things I need to know. The next thing I need to know is these angle measures. Well, let's just take a look at the angle measure of F. So for F, we're given a leg and a leg, so we can, or a hypotenuse and a leg. So for the measure of angle F, that's what we're trying to figure out right now. Let's go ahead and figure that out. So we have a opposite and a hypotenuse. So I'm going to use sine. So sine of F, because we don't know what F is opposite over adjacent. So now, in order for us to figure out what F is, we have to take the sine inverse of both sides. So then we end up getting F is equal to the sine inverse of 5 divided by 13. Well, what's the sine inverse of 5 divided by 13? That's going to be 22.62 degrees. So this angle right here is 22.62 degrees. This angle right here is 90 degrees. So to get angle G, I don't even have to use trigonometric functions. I can just take 180 for a measure of angle G now. For the measure of angle G, I can take 180 and subtract 90 and subtract 22.62. And when you do that, you get 67.38 degrees. So now I know all of the angles and all the sides of my triangle. So that concludes your note video today. Go ahead and show me your completed note sheet when you're done. Thank you for listening.